On November 20th, 1968, at approximately 5:30 a.m., an explosion occurred in the number 9 mine of the Mountaineer Coal Company near Farmington, West Virginia. At that time, 99 miners were working underground. Of the 21 miners who survived the explosion and were able to escape to the surface, 8 were working in the 7 South section. 2 of these miners were willing to share their experiences.
We were building stoppings on the section because we were making a left turn around this top end at this fan shaft. To go around that block of coal was from 1 South to 7 South. And there's a lot of acres in there and hundreds of gas wells, active and inactive. And they were going around the back side to try to mine some of it out from there back from 7 South back to 1 South. I didn't know at the time that the fan was down, but a rumor said that it was down at 2 o'clock. And the mine didn't blow till 5:25. But I knew when that dust come in there, we were wheeling blocks. It just come in there skimming, wasn't an inch off the ground, and this was like that, and you couldn't see your hands in front of your face like that. I said, man, they had a hell of an ignition somewhere. And I guess they did. Well, I know the lay of the mine. I'd been all over. I'd work in a different section every night on a stopping somewhere, or on an overcast or a regulator or whatever. But it'd be in a different part of the mine all the time. And I knowed the mine pretty well. I could walk out there from anywhere. But there was nowhere to go. Only we got together there in one bunch, the whole section crew. There was 8 of us, 8, 9 counting the man on the dump, but he went the other way. You didn't talk to Martin yet, did you? Well, he had mining papers. He mined foreman papers. He done passed the state exam, federal exam, everything. You ought to go talk to him.
I started working at Farmington No. 9 in 1967. I had left Loveridge Mine because it was so gassy. I was afraid they were going to have an explosion and blow it up. And I went to No. 9 Mine in 67, and that explosion happened there in 1968. Several miners were concerned with float coal dust in the mine. They were concerned that the company was not doing enough rock dusting. A lot of people complained about ventilation controls. We'd had a fire in the mine probably 2 weeks prior to this explosion. That was a sizable fire that the midnight shift foreman and 3 or 4 guys fought and put the fire out, and never notified the dispatcher or anything that there was a fire in the mine. And the fire was large enough that the mine should have been evacuated. Guys talked about that quite a bit. They were more concerned with ventilation and coal dust in No. 9 Mine. The night before the explosion on our section, we were gassed off for 4 hours. We had split air with 2 returns. And the return on the right side was 8 stoppings behind, and the right-hand return was 9 stoppings behind. That's the reason that the 2 masons were on our section that night building stoppings. I was maintenance. I was on maintenance. I was a mechanic, but I was running buggy extra that night, running shuttle car on 7 South section, and we were in number 7 heading, and I had about a half buggy coal from the loading machine, and power went off. Just click, power went off, everything. So I stepped off the buggy and thought, what in the world's going on, you know, and stepped back into the intersection, and this man was like somebody hit me in the face with a bucket full of dirt. I mean, you couldn't see, you couldn't breathe. So I just pulled my face down in my shirt, pulled my shirt up over my face and just sat down because you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was so dusty. And there was a good bit of concussion force came in on us. The miner operator and the load machine operator had injuries from concussion. But I just sat there for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And the miner operator and the loading machine operator crawled back along the machinery to where I was and bumped into me because it was still so dusty and smoky that you couldn't see. And my buggy cable was anchored at the dinner hole at the power center, and that's where our self-rescuers were. And I told the loading machine man, I said, we'll just follow my buggy cable back to the dinner hole because you couldn't see where to walk. I mean, you would have gotten lost trying to get back to the dinner hole because you couldn't see where to go. So we followed my buggy cable hand over hand back to the dinner hole, and on the way we picked up the other shuttle car operator through voice contact, and he got with us, and we got back to the dinner hole where the self-rescuers were. At that time the dust had started to settle down somewhat. Now there were 2 masons, block masons, and the utility man and the section foreman were at the dinner hole. So that completed our crew that was on the section. So we briefly discussed what we thought had happened. We didn't know whether it had been a face ignition in a section down from us or to what extent the explosion was, but we know there had been an explosion someplace. So we immediately put our self-rescuers on, which is what you're instructed to do. And we calmly went down the track heading. Our man Triff was blowing off the end of the track about 4 blocks. Trolley wire was blowing out of the hangers. Our section belt, part of it was turned upside down. There was block stoppings blowing in both directions for 200 feet. The explosive force when we got to the crosscut or the heading that went over to the new air shaft, their roof bolt plates actually turned vertical from the explosive force. That new air shaft relieved enough pressure off of us that it didn't kill us right where we were. So we went on to the new air shaft, crossing a overcast that was built to stay there 20 years. It was really double walled 12-inch block overcast, double walls, 90-pound steel on top on 1-foot centers with 1/2-inch plate laid in between the rails and all concreted on top, and it just tore that overcast all to pieces. It twisted rails like a dish rag. It broke rails. It run rails and rib. It scattered blocks for 300 or 400 feet in both directions. And when we got to that overcast, the section foreman stood on a pile of rubble there and looked at us and said, "Something awful's happened." And the guy wet his pants. So we went on to the new air shaft, and 8 of us got to the new air shaft. Our belt head man, Paul Henderson, wasn't there, and myself and Jerry Davis went back down to the belt head, which we probably should not have done, because the only thing we had were the little self-rescuers that were not self-contained, and they're only good for up to 2% carbon monoxide. And our belt head's man's bucket was still sitting at the belt head, and we looked all up and down the empty and loaded track and all around the belt drive and back down the main line for 2 or 3 blocks till I got a very bad feeling that we better not go any further. Apparently the atmosphere was good enough at the belt head that we didn't get down. It was kind of a foolish move on our part. we might have lost 2 more men looking for one. You know, it's a shame. It's a hard way to put it. You may know where that guy is, but you don't know what atmosphere he's in, what the conditions are where he is, and if you don't have the right equipment to go look for him safely, then you better not go. That's what mine rescue teams are for. And it would be a shame to lose 2 more lives to look for one that may already be lost. Nobody really made that decision. The section foreman didn't. Jerry Davis and myself made the decision to go down and look for Paul Henderson. We couldn't find him. I think he panicked and went down the main line toward the outside the wrong way. And he knew in every weekly safety meeting that we had that we always said if anything happened, go to the new air shaft. He didn't do it. He went the wrong way. When we got to the bottom of the air shaft, 5 of the guys that were with us took the self-rescuers out of their mouths. One of the fellows on our crew, one of the block masons, Wakeman Hillberry, had been on a rescue team that went back in Farmington 1954. And I started to take my self-rescuer out of my mouth when I looked over at Bud, and Bud shook his head no and pointed to his rescuer. So I left my rescuer in my mouth, and within 30 minutes, the 5 guys that had taken their rescuers out of their mouths were on the pavement. They were down. They really didn't regain complete consciousness until they got them to the hospital in Fairmont because of the carbon monoxide content in their blood. They really didn't. They really weren't. They didn't talk right. You know, they didn't have all their faculties about them. They didn't act right. They were disoriented. You know, and that's what CO does to you. That's the reason that you keep your self-rescuer in your mouth, because a little bit of CO will make you think funny, and you do dumb things, and you don't do too many dumb things till you don't do anything, and that's the way that is. They dropped the telephone down to us. Probably we got to the bottom of that shaft about 6 o'clock. They dropped the telephone down to us about 7. And John Ashcraft, who was then Inspector Large of the State Department of Mines, was on the telephone on the surface. And Bud wasn't feeling too good. Bud had some years on him at that time, and he handed me the telephone. And the other guy that was with us, by the name of Charles Krim, was setting in an offset in that shaft for a pump. And Charlie never said a word all the time we were at the bottom of that shaft. He'd only been in mine 6 months. And I think at that time Charlie was 56 years old. So I put the earphones on, and they dropped some 2-hour gas masks down to us. And I put a 2-hour gas mask on, as did Bud and Charlie Krim. And John Ashcraft asked me what the conditions were like at the bottom of the shaft. And I said, well, the atmosphere right now is pretty clear. But we've got 5 guys down. There's 3 of us still conscious. And Bud Hillberry asked me briefly, asked him how much air the shaft's intaking, and put his rescuer back in his mouth. So I asked John, I said, how much air is this shaft intaking? And he said, we just took an air reading, and it's naturally intaking 144,000. Now guys, in 144,000 cubic feet of air, carbon monoxide backed up on us. So when they tell you to put a rescuer on and don't take it off till you get outside, they're not kidding. Just because the atmosphere is clear and looks good doesn't mean it's clear. There could be some deadly atmosphere, parts of that atmosphere that you can't see. So you keep that self-rescuer on till you get outside. Okay? They dropped a resuscitator down to us, an oxygen resuscitator. And I went over to the 5 guys that was down and turned the oxygen on and put the mask on their face. And Lois Lake seemed to be in the worst condition, the miner operator. And when he started stirring around somewhat, then I put a 2-hour gas mask on him, pulled the seal off the bottom. You got to remember how these things work, guys. You know, don't get excited and forget a step, because you can put a gas mask on somebody and not take the seal off the bottom, kill them, because they can't breathe. So I got to the 5th guy and got him stirring around a little bit and got a gas mask on him. And I didn't know at the time, from lack of training, that anybody that's down from carbon monoxide, you do not give them a full shot of pure oxygen all at once, because it makes them sick. So I looked at the first guy, and his face piece was filling up with vomit. And I cleaned his out, and, you know, and he threw up, and I threw up. The next guy threw up, everybody threw up, you know, because too much oxygen too quick. But at least we got the guys breathing decent and got them covered up with some Brady's cloth, and got the gas mask on. And John said that we're going to start number 1, number 2 fans back up. It was about 5 minutes to 8 that morning. And he said, pay attention to the atmosphere. So about 5 minutes after 8, John said, we're starting the fans now. So a few minutes went by, and I looked down ahead him, and it looked like a tumbleweed in a Western movie coming up to head him. Just stuff rolling, Brady's cloth and rock dust bags and dust. And when they started those 2 fans up, I surmised they pulled enough oxygen back into the mine to propagate another explosion. And man, it took stuff way up that shaft. I mean, rocks and all kind of stuff. So John's yelling on the phone, hey, down there, you guys all right? What's going on? I said, shut the fans off. Shut the fans off. You know, I don't agree with starting the fans quick as possible. There may be some study need to be done on that, because if you've got a fire and a gas mixture, and you put the oxygen to it, then you're going to get another explosion, which is exactly what happened. So John told us that they were in a process of getting a hydro crane and a muck bucket, or construction bucket, to pull us out. And about 9:30, John said the bucket's here, and they started lowering the bucket down to us. And the construction bucket got about 20 foot from the bottom and stopped. And I said, let it down about another 20 feet, John. And he said, we're out of cable. So they had to pull the bucket back up, pull all the cable off the crane, send to Fairmont Supply and get all new cable, bring from Fairmont to Mannington, rethread the cable on the crane, put the bucket on again, and set it down. An odd thing is, they had lowered a 2-gallon bucket down to us with a big mayonnaise jar full of hot coffee and it wrapped in rags on a 3/8 hemp rope. And the bucket set down, and I poured the rags off the top and saw the coffee in the jar, and did not have my gloves on, and I went to pull the jar up out of the bucket, and the lid was hot that I could handle it with my bare hands. I had to put my gloves back on. So I pulled the jar up out, and I said to Charlie Krim, Charlie, you want some coffee? And he said, yeah. And that was the only thing Charlie had said all the time we were at the bottom of that shaft. And Charlie come over and took the jar and screwed the lid off of it and turned that coffee jug up and probably drank 3 inches of coffee out of it. That was so hot it was scalded and didn't even burn him. Now that's what kind of a state of mind you can get in, okay? If Charlie had not been with us, Charlie probably would not have survived, because he would not have known what to do. But they finally sent the bucket down, told us put the first 3 people in, the sickest people. I said, John, there's a pretty good sized bucket. We can get more than 3 people in it. He said, well, we don't know what the bucket's going to do. He said it might have to get halfway up the shaft, upset, or we didn't know what it's going to do. I said, boy, John, you're full of good news this morning, aren't you? But we put the 3 sickest people in first, and they hoisted them up, and then we sent it back down and put the next 3 in, and sent them up. And the bucket made the 3rd trip, and Charlie and Bud Hillberry and I made the 3rd trip. We got 15 feet from the top of the shaft, and the wire rope jumped a shiv wheel on the end of the crane boom and fouled the cable. That's when they took the famous picture of the 3 of us in the bucket. And Bud Hillberry said, why don't you raise the crane boom up? It was a hydro crane, so they did, and swung the boom over and got us out. Kind of an oddity, they had us in a tent checking heart rates and blood pressures, you know. They'd already sent the other 5 guys to the hospital from concussion injuries. And I said, Bud, what were you thinking about when we were sitting 15 feet from the top of that shaft? He said, the only thing I could think of was another explosion coming up that shaft and blowing us 300 feet in the air. You know, it was just kind of a tragic situation. People just didn't know which direction to go, you know. Well, at least we got you 8 out. Yeah, but there's still 78 still in there. How are we going to get them out? Can we get them out? You know, that's the rescue teams days later tried to get in the slope. Too much gas and explosions, still minor explosions going on. I knew then that we're going to get any more out alive. Matter of fact, my wife asked me that night at home. The lady that lived next door's son rode to work with me, and he had just drawn his first paycheck, Jerry and Arrow. And she come over to the house, and she said, are they going to get my son out? He's with the track crew, and I didn't know where the track crew was. And I said, yeah, Mama, you know, they'll get him. Well, they did, years later. Number 9 taught me a lot. And it taught me a lot real quick. It taught me the first thing that you do not do is panic. You cannot panic in a situation like that. If you do, you're dead man. You get one mistake and that's your last. Our dump belt head man made that mistake. And the guy was 24 years old, you know, and I think about him quite often. I think about those 78 men quite often. There were things that happened that night that should not have happened, but they did, and it caused a critical situation. And people that are trained correctly and have paid attention to their training, which is, I'm telling you, it's critical to pay attention to your training, because someday it could save your life. Whether it be first aid training, whether it be escape training, or whatever kind of training there is for underground. Whether it be coal mine, gold mine, potash mine, doesn't make a difference. Underground mining is a different world.
The Farmington No. 9 mine was sealed on November 30th, 1968. Recovery operations began in September of 1969 and continued for almost 10 years until April 1968, when the mine was permanently sealed. Of the 78 men who died, 59 were recovered. 19 others remain entombed in the mine. The legacy of these miners will never be forgotten. A permanent memorial is located at the mine site to honor those who perished. In the aftermath of this disaster, Congress passed the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act of 1969. This legislation has forever changed the way coal is mined in the United States and has paved the way for continuous improvement in mine safety and health.